Have you ever read a quote from the famous poet Rumi and just felt deeply moved?
Oh, absolutely.
Right, like he somehow reached across 8 centuries and perfectly described the exact ache in your own heart. I mean, Rumi is everywhere today.
He really is. You see him quoted in, modern wedding vows.
Instagram captions, yoga studios, everywhere.
Exactly. But here is the massive twist. The Rumi, this universal voice of spiritual love, he wouldn't exist without a mysterious wandering basket weaver.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. This guy essentially showed up one day and literally threw Rumi's life's work into a fountain.
And that deliberate erasure, that whole crazy dynamic is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Yeah, it remains one of the most stunning paradoxes in, well, literary and spiritual history, really.
For sure. So we are taking a deep dive into the historical and theological records today. We're specifically grounding our conversation in this profound research by Nasir Amlani called The Sun Behind Rumi's Light.
It's a fantastic source, really lays it all out.
It really does. And our mission today is to explore the radical, fiery philosophy of this guy, Shams Tabrizi.
Right, the 13th century Persian mystic who catalyzed this massive spiritual transformation.
And we want to figure out his roadmap for finding the infinite in the everyday. Because to even begin to understand Shams, you have to accept that he operated entirely as a deliberate paradox.
Oh, completely. I mean, we are talking about a man with a towering intellect.
Wait.
He was an incredibly profound thinker, but he actively chose to disguise himself as like a common illiterate tradesman.
Which makes no sense on paper.
Right. He spent his life wandering the Middle East, basically testing those around him. He was searching for someone who could actually see past the dirt in the disguise.
And I want to dig right into the mechanics of that choice, because a brilliant mind choosing absolute obscurity is, well, it's rare.
Very rare.
Looking at his origins, Shams was born around 1185 CE in Tabriz, which is in modern-day Iran, and he had this rigorous, elite dual education.
Yeah, he wasn't just some uneducated wanderer from the start. On one hand, he was trained in formal Islamic jurisprudence.
So, like, the rigid outer rules of religion.
Exactly. And on the other hand, he was receiving this deep, mystical Sufi training under master teachers, like Hazrat Sheikh Abu Bakr Salabaf.
Wow.
He had this insatiable hunger to understand the mechanics of the universe.
And he was good at it, right?
Oh, he was a prodigy. He would essentially absorb a spiritual teacher fully, like learn everything they had to offer, map out their entire philosophical framework, and then
what?
Then he'd realize it still wasn't enough to quench his specific thirst.
Ah.
He reached a level of perception where the inherited words of his teachers just felt inadequate. He was constitutionally incapable of settling for secondhand truths.
No matter how prestigious the source was.
Exactly.
The analogy that kept coming to mind while looking at his early life in the source material is the brilliant student who completely outgrows the Ivy League syllabus.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right. Imagine a student at a top-tier university who just drops out to go backpack across the world. Not because they couldn't handle the academic rigor.
But because the textbooks suddenly felt dead.
Yes. They look at the syllabus and realize, this is just a map. I want to walk on the actual earth.
Yeah.
So Shams leaves.
He travels across Persia and Syria, making a living by weaving baskets.
And occasionally teaching children, I think.
Yeah, just odd jobs. But we need to be really clear about why he did that.
Right, because it wasn't just a tactical move to seem humble.
No, not at all. It was a deeply metaphysical practice. Shams understood the mechanics of the ego, or what Sufis call the nafs.
The nafs, okay.
Yeah. And the ego feeds on recognition. It gorgs itself on status, titles, the admiring gaze of others.
So by traveling anonymously.
By dressing in rags, and sometimes acting deliberately crude or jarring to push people away, he was actively starving his ego.
Wow.
He was making a lived, physical statement that the divine does not wear the costume of human prestige.
So if you only respect the guy standing at the front of the room in the fancy scholar's robes, you're missing the frequency entirely.
Yeah, completely missing it, yeah.
But he wasn't just wandering to prove a point, right? He had a very specific mission.
He did. It's encapsulated in this prayer where he asked God directly to send him a companion who could, and I quote, bear what I carry.
Bear what I carry, that is heavy.
It is. He was carrying an immense psychological and spiritual weight. And he was hunting for a wali Allah, a friend of God, capable of receiving it.
Because I imagine when you are carrying a spiritual fire of that magnitude, the isolation must be crushing.
How completely crushing. And you can't just hand that intensity to anyone.
Right, it would destroy them.
It would burn them up. It requires an equal, someone whose own internal capacity matches your intensity. So he searched for decades for a mirror that wouldn't crack when he looked into it.
Decades just wandering and waiting.
Yeah.
And that decades-long search leads directly to the collision.
The famous collision.
Right. In the year 1244 CE, in the city of Konya, he finally finds his match, Rumi.
And when two massive forces like this meet, it isn't a polite handshake.
No, it is an explosion.
Absolutely. Picture the socio-political reality of Konya at the time. Rumi is this prestigious, highly respected scholar and jurist.
He's like the ultimate insider.
Exactly. He is a pillar of the community. He's surrounded by wealthy patrons, eager students, towering stacks of books. He represents the absolute pinnacle of institutional orthodox success.
And into this very comfortable elite bubble walks Shams.
Looking like a beggar.
Looking like a beggar. And the historical legends surrounding this first encounter are wild. One account says Shams asks Rumi an unanswerable theological question that literally causes Rumi to fall off his mule in shock.
I love that one.
Right, but the more famous account, and definitely the most visceral, is that Rumi is sitting by a fountain reading his precious hand-copied manuscripts.
These are incredibly valuable books back then.
Irreplaceable. And Shams walks up, grabs the books, the accumulated product of years of intense scholarship, and just throws them into the water.
The ink just bleeds out into the fountain.
Okay, I have to stop here.
Go ahead.
Because taking someone's life work and destroying it is universally recognized as terrible behavior.
Oh, it's definitely frowned upon.
I mean, if I hire a life coach and they throw my laptop into a lake to teach me a lesson, I am pressing charges.
Yeah, you'd call the police.
Exactly. That is a toxic dynamic. Why is this celebrated as a spiritual awakening?
It sounds aggressive because it was aggressive. There's no getting around that. But look at the underlying mechanism of what Shams was doing.
Okay, what was he doing?
Rumi was trapped in a prison of his own intellect. Shams knew that Sufism, the direct experience of the divine, cannot be learned through theoretical study.
You can't just read about it.
Right. It requires going out and doing it. Rumi had meticulously collected all the maps of the territory. He knew every contour of the spiritual landscape intellectually.
But he had never actually stood out in the rain.
Yes. Perfect way to say it. So his immense knowledge had actually mutated into a veil.
It was blocking him from experiencing the very thing he was studying.
Precisely. Rumi's problem wasn't ignorance. His problem was his certainty.
Ah.
He thought his vast accumulation of information was wisdom. So Shams throwing the books into the water was a psychological shock tactic.
It was the fire designed to ban away the illusion that God could be captured on a piece of paper.
Exactly. You have to shatter the illusion to see reality.
That makes the aftermath so much more compelling, honestly. After this violent disruption of Rumi's reality, they essentially vanished together.
They do. They lock themselves in a room for 40 days for a sohbet.
A sohbet, which translates to a sacred conversation or companionship.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't view those 40 days as just a timeline. It was a psychological laboratory.
A laboratory. I like that.
Yes, the number 40 carries massive symbolic weight. Think of Moses on Sinai, right? It represents purification and the crossing of a threshold.
Sure, it's a classic spiritual motif. But practically, in that room, Shams was actively dismantling the rest of Rumi's worldview. It wasn't a traditional teacher-student dynamic where one lectures and the other takes notes.
Right, because the notebooks are at the bottom of a fountain.
Exactly. It was two flames merging into a single fire.
Which brings us to the actual theology they were forging in that room, because the ideas Shams was transferring to Rumi are radical.
Very radical.
Especially for the 13th century. According to Amlani's research, Shams built his entire philosophy on the premise that God is utterly uncontainable.
Right.
He insisted that the divine is not confined to the mosque, the temple, the church, or the synagogue.
We hear that today and think, oh, what a nice poetic sentiment.
Like a bumper sticker.
Yeah, exactly. But in a highly institutionalized 13th century religious society, that borders on heresy.
Because the institutions derive their power from being the exclusive gatekeepers to God.
And Shams is bypassing the gatekeepers entirely. He taught that God is present every moment, everywhere, literally in the breath entering your lungs right now.
He viewed the entire cosmos as a living scripture. He called the universe a scripture without letters.
He's making a very precise metaphysical claim here. Every leaf, every river, every heartbeat is a continuous act of divine self-disclosure.
So the natural world isn't just a metaphor for God's glory.
No, it is actively, continuously praising the Creator. The tragedy, according to Shams, is that human beings are so burdened with our own noisy consciousness that we forget how to listen.
We're just too distracted.
Way too distracted.
Okay.
We walk past these living mirrors every single day, insisting on looking for the sacred inside stone buildings while the divine is waiting for us in the wind.
Man, that is powerful. And this connects perfectly to a fascinating psychological angle in Shams's teachings.
The 40 rules.
Yes, he laid out these 40 rules, and the very first rule acts as a sort of spiritual Rorschach test.
I love this concept.
It's brilliant. It states that how we see God is a direct reflection of how we see ourselves. So if you look at the concept of the divine and you see a punishing, fearful, blaming entity.
It is because you are full of fear and blame.
Exactly.
It's pure psychological projection, centuries before modern psychology even named it.
Right.
The human heart is a mirror reflecting the divine. But the quality of the image depends entirely on the clarity of your mirror.
So if your internal world is clouded by unresolved trauma, resentment, or just a bloated ego,
you will project that onto your theology. You will worship a deity made in the image of your own neuroses.
wow.
Shams insists that rigorous self-knowledge is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite to knowing God.
And to truly know God, Shams introduces a concept that sounds absolutely terrifying on the surface. He talks about fana and baqa.
Yes, the big ones.
He references the story of Moses on Mount Sinai, where Moses demands to see God directly. God tells Moses to look at the mountain. The mountain shatters into dust, and Moses falls unconscious.
Because the presence is too much.
Right. Shams says, no one has seen him and lived. But he isn't talking about physical death, is he?
No, not physical death. He is talking about the death of the ego, the annihilation of the illusion of separateness. This is fana.
Fana.
Right. And modern neuroscience actually gives us a great framework for this today.
Oh, really? How so?
We have something called the default mode network in our brains, which is basically responsible for our rigid sense of self, our autobiographical narrative.
The voice in our head that says, I am me.
Exactly. And as long as that network is hyperactive, as long as you maintain this rigid boundary of I am me and the universe is over there, you cannot experience profound unity.
So the I has to shatter like that mountain.
Yes.
The source material has this incredible analogy that captures how this works without it sounding like you're just, vanishing into the void.
The cup of water.
Yes. Imagine your individual mind, your ego, is a tiny cup of water taken from the ocean.
Okay.
If you look inside your little cup, you see a tiny contained reflection. It feels safe. Now imagine pouring that cup back into the vast ocean.
The tiny reflection disappears.
The boundary of the cup is gone. But the water itself hasn't been destroyed, right? It has just become one with the vastness.
Exactly. There's no actual loss, only infinite expansion.
Only infinite expansion.
And that infinite expansion is baqa.
Baqa.
Yeah, the eternal abiding. You don't disappear into nothingness. You wake up and realize you were never actually separate from the ocean to begin with.
Yeah.
You become the instrument through which the universe experiences itself.
That is soaring. Beautiful theology. But
It's a but.
there's always a but. Returning to the reality of Shams, the guy was a basket weaver.
Right.
He lived in the dirt. He wasn't sitting in ivory towers debating metaphysics. So this couldn't just be an academic exercise for him.
Not at all.
He had to have a practical, physical way for normal people to embody this. How do you actually die before you die while walking around the market buying vegetables?
Well, the first, most crucial step, according to Shams, is to stop pretending. You have to undergo a process of unbecoming.
Stripping away the performance.
Right, because the ego loves to wear a quote-unquote spiritual costume.
Oh, definitely.
It loves to perform piety or wisdom for others. Shams says the path isn't about acquiring new, shiny spiritual traits to show off.
It is about actively unbecoming everything that is not authentic.
Exactly. You have to drop the masks and stand naked in your own soul's poverty.
And to help with that unbecoming, he provides the most accessible tool imaginable, the breath.
The breath. Yes.
Shams taught that the breath is the literal bridge between the seen and the unseen worlds. And the practice is profound in its simplicity.
Yeah.
On the inhale, you think? He entered.
And on the exhale, I disappear.
He enters. I disappear. It turns the most automatic biological human function into an act of continuous surrender.
Every single exhale becomes a micro-practice of fana, that ego death we just discussed.
Oh.
I disappear. You are repeatedly practicing releasing the tight, anxious grip of the self.
And this leads to what might be the biggest paradigm shift in all of Shams's teachings. He points to something called a hadith al-Qudsi.
Right, which is a very specific type of teaching.
Yeah, for context, in the Islamic tradition, a hadith is a recorded saying of the Prophet Muhammad, but a hadith al-Qudsi is special. It's a saying where God speaks directly through the Prophet.
And the specific one Shams focuses on completely flips the script on how we view the spiritual search.
It really does. Usually we frame spirituality as, humans down here on earth aching for meaning, reaching up into the dark, trying to find God.
Trying to bridge the gap.
Right. But this hadith centers on a startling revelation from the divine. It says, I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known. Therefore, I created the creation so that I might be known.
So God was a hidden treasure longing to be known.
Which means, as Shams concludes, you are not the seeker, you are the sought.
Let that mechanism sink in for a second.
It's huge.
God didn't create humans to have a subservient audience. God created human consciousness because it provides the capacity to recognize, reflect, and love the divine. The universe wanted a mirror.
So that ache you feel in your chest, that existential dread or profound yearning for meaning, that is not just human neurosis reaching up into a void.
No.
That is the divine reaching down, remembering itself through the medium of your human consciousness.
It radically recontextualizes human emotion. Every tear shed in grief, every moment of awe looking at a night sky is the divine experiencing its own creation through your eyes.
You are the specific coordinate in space and time where God remembers himself.
Exactly. And there is a teaching story passed down that perfectly captures how fiercely we resist this idea.
Oh, the story of the saint. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so a man comes to a Sufi saint and aggressively demands, I want to see God. Show me God.
Classic seeker behavior.
Right. And the saint just looks calmly at him and says, then look at me.
And the guy loses it.
The man is immediately furious. He feels insulted. He says, how dare you elevate yourself like that?
He misses the point entirely.
Completely. And the saint explains, you are looking at me as a man, but if you looked without the eyes of judgment, you would see nothing but him.
Because Shams believed our primary flaw is our vision.
Yes, we constantly slice the world up into binaries. Sacred and profane, holy and ordinary, us and them.
But the divine is hiding in plain sight.
It is in the face of the beggar on the street, just as much as it is in the holiest shrine. The problem has never been that God is absent. The problem is that our eyes of judgment fragment reality.
We are walking around completely asleep.
And Shams saw it as his cosmic job to wake people up, starting most famously with Rumi.
But we have to look at the historical reality of what happened next, because awakening people in a rigid society comes with a terrible cost.
It almost always does.
Right, the story doesn't end with them happily meditating in Konya forever. Shams eventually disappears, not once, but twice.
And the second time, he never returns.
The socio-political dynamics of Konya caught up with them. Rumi's traditional students were deeply accustomed to having exclusive access to their prestigious master.
And suddenly, this crude, wandering outsider arrives and monopolizes Rumi's attention.
The students felt their power and proximity slipping away. They grew intensely, violently jealous.
And the historical accounts are pretty fractured here. Some suggest that Shams recognized his work was done and slipped away secretly to let Rumi stand on his own.
Just walked away into the desert.
Right. But many historians and later traditions believe he was murdered by Rumi's jealous followers, literally assassinated in the night to remove the disruption he caused.
Whether it was murder or a willing departure, the physical loss was the ultimate brutal test for Rumi.
It was. I mean, it is one thing to feel the presence of the divine when your brilliant, fiery guide is sitting right across from you in a 40-day retreat.
Yeah, that's the easy part.
It's entirely another challenge to find the beloved in the crushing void of total absence.
Rumi's grief was monumental. It completely shattered him, but out of that devastating psychological rupture, the teachings finally took root.
The sea cracked open.
Exactly. In his grief, he began to spin, which is the origin of the whirling dervishes, and he began to pour out poetry. Tens of thousands of verses that became the Diwan-i Tabrizi.
He named his greatest work, not after himself, but after his master.
Because through the grief, Rumi finally crossed the threshold. He wrote, "Why should I seek? I am the same as he. His essence speaks through me."
Rumi realized the profound truth of fana. There is no two. There is only the one.
Only the one.
The fire of laws had consumed Rumi's false self, his intellectual arrogance, his need for status. What remained was a luminous, open channel. And through Rumi's resulting poetry, Shams's legacy shifted the entire landscape of Islamic mysticism.
He fundamentally shifted the culture of Sufism from Zud to Ish.
Yes, Zud represents asceticism, like rigorous rule-following, harsh self-discipline, the fear-based avoidance of sin.
Right.
Shams didn't say discipline was useless, but he utterly subordinated it to Ish, which is fierce, ecstatic divine love.
Under Shams's influence, love became the supreme mechanism and the ultimate goal. He democratized spirituality, proving that you don't need to be an elite scholar in a library to find God.
You just need a heart willing to burn.
Which brings us to a final, very provocative thought for you to carry with you today. It's inspired by the source materials analysis of the 40 Rules. Shams taught something incredibly counterintuitive about the nature of belief. True faith actually requires its seeming opposite, disbelief.
It is a vital paradox. Authentic faith is not the rigid suppression of doubt. It is the active willingness to let every false certainty you hold be challenged and burned away.
The teaching suggests that God is most often encountered in the exact form the ego finds hardest to accept.
For example, encountering the divine, not in the comfort of a familiar prayer, but in the agonizing, ego-crushing moment of forgiving someone you swore you would never forgive.
So we want to leave you with this question to mull over. Think about your current worldview. Think about your idea of what is true or sacred or right.
Is it entirely comfortable?
Has it ever forced you to deeply question your own certainties or embrace your own doubts? Has it ever demanded that you do something as radically uncomfortable as letting go of your own judgment?
Because if your truth has never challenged you, have you actually encountered truth?
Or have you just built a very comfortable idol out of your own mind?
The Sufi walks with empty hands. If your palms are tightly clenched around your own certainties, how can you ever grasp the infinite?
The next time you see a beautifully curated quote from Rumi about love or the universe, remember the wandering basket weaver in the dirt. Remember that before the soaring poetry could exist, there was a fire that burned the scholar's entire identity to the ground. There were lifetimes of books thrown into a fountain, all to prove one piercing point. The words on the page are not the water. Go find the ocean.